Well, good afternoon, colleagues, staff, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being here today. Today, we welcome back to Council Chambers Laura Gagnon. She's going to sing the national anthem. Laura has been here at Council before. We're excited to have her back, particularly because you're moving to Ottawa very soon, and just know that you have a standing appointment here whenever you'd like to come. As you know, colleagues, Laura was nominated for a Jack Richardson Music Contributor Award for her work in the London scene with her showcase, the Dollhouse Showcase, celebrating women in music. Laura is going to be opening up for legendary Chuck Leavell on March 24th. Please join me and her very proud father, Paul, who's filming from the gallery, as we sing the national anthem.
Oh, Canada, terre de nos aïeux, t'enfant laissé de fleurs en glorieux, qu'elle t'embrasse te bonne pays, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our lands glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Did you get that, Dad? We don't need to do it again? In one take? Oh, amazing, amazing. We have a number of recognitions, colleagues, today. Some very proud moments that we're here to celebrate. Today, our first recognition is for the members of the Trail Focus Group. And let's welcome them to Council Chambers. Well, I know you and you. Colleagues, the City of London was recognized by the Ontario Association of Landscape Architects with the Award for Service to the Environment. This award was a result of the council-approved guidelines for management zones and trails in environmentally significant areas. I think we did a pilot somewhere north of Medway, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. The 2012 guidelines were updated through an extensive community engagement process with the support of the Trail Focus Group here with us today. The Trail Focus Group includes representatives from the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee, the Accessibility Advisory Committee, Adopt an Environment Significant Area Groups, Thames Valley Trail Association, Nature London, and the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. A team of landscape architects and ecologists from planning services led the update process with the support from Dillon scientists and facilitators at Dillon Consulting. The new updated guidelines are science-based, repeatable, and transparent trail planning policies. It's a process that improves the community engagement experience, and it ensures the protection of the ecological features and functions of our ESAs. The guidelines also provide direction to accessible trails consistent with the Accessibility for Ontario's with Disabilities Act. I should put these back on. There we go. I'm getting used to a new kind of lens that I don't want to talk much about. This ensures that London natural areas are more accessible for all Londoners. I'm proud of all of the hard work that this group has contributed to our London community, and please join me in a big thank you to the members of the Trail Focus Group for their award-winning work. And we've got this plaque right here. Please, absolutely.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to council, of course, for supporting all the work that we do every year through the budget processes. It's terrific. It really helps us do what we need to do, and the document is one of those guidelines that helps us get through that process effectively. Very important. And to the team, of course, they put in the hard work to put that document together, but I'd be remiss if I didn't speak to the people who do this. Linda McDougall, of course, are here. James McKay, who couldn't be here. The city's two ecologists who help lead all of these environmental planning processes. Fantastic work that they do every year. Do anybody else want a quick comment?
Please. An open mic.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, for the recognition, and thank you for the opportunity to be involved in this project. Good guidelines are very important to protecting the ecological integrity of these areas, and we'll continue to watch as we work with them through future studies. But thank you very much.
Colleagues and staff, people watching from home and people in attendance, I am so proud to welcome Teresa Carrier and the One Run team. Come on out. Yeah, just grab a spot close by. Everybody knows Teresa, and I think everybody knows that Teresa is a breast cancer survivor. Teresa is my modern day version of Terry Fox, a hero of mine. She has run a 100-kilometer stretch in a single day between London and Sarnia, or Sarnia and London, 4 times. It's an incredible feat. I had the privilege a couple of years ago to run kilometer 5 with Teresa, just leaving Sarnia about 6:30 in the morning. And she just wanted to talk and talk and talk. And that was no problem for me because I had to run a kilometer, but I reminded her a couple of times she had 95 more to go. Teresa has now transitioned and grown this fundraising event, started fundraising events at high schools. And now 10 local tracks around London invite over 20 high schools for participants to come in and raise all kinds of money for an incredible cause. It's mirroring Teresa's 100-kilometer day run as teams spend their entire day running around school tracks. And One Run continues to be a huge success in our community. It creates an opportunity for youth to come together and to motivate each other to achieve their full potential. And this is a phenomenal number. Since the beginning of One Run in 2010, the team has raised almost $1 million. The funds raised go directly to London Regional Cancer Program's Patient Assistance Program, as well as the Breast Cancer Clinic Research and Tumor Biobank at Lawson's Health Research Institute. I had the privilege of seeing if we could have Teresa recognized with the Meritus Service Decorations Medal, and she will be receiving that award from the Governor General of Canada later this year. Unless you've already got it. No. Keep me posted. This medal is awarded to a Canadian who's being recognized for their exceptional deeds to their community and a citizen who's bringing honor to their country. And so please join me in congratulating Teresa, the hundreds of volunteers that she has motivated throughout this cause, and the thousands of young people whose lives she has touched, showing them that altruism, that giving, that volunteering is an essential part of living our day-to-day lives. 2017 was the most successful one run yet, and I think we've got a lot of years to look forward to. Congratulations, Teresa. Do you want to say a few words?
Thank you very much for inviting myself and the One Run team here today. I humbly and proudly accept this award on behalf of the One Run team, the hundreds of volunteers, and for those families that are facing the battle of cancer. An idea comes often and to many of us, and it's just that, it's just an idea. And unless you have a group of people who believe in you, who trust you, and who share your passion to serve others, it's not possible. I'm truly grateful to the group of people behind me who have not only been with me since the very beginning, but who have inspired thousands of school-age kids to do more for their community. So in May of 2018 of this year, we have 10 high schools in 10 days who will be running and walking laps of tracks to raise money. They have been motivated to be community servers, and I think that's what we're here for. That's what we're all about. I think it's our responsibility as community members to serve others who need our support. So on behalf of all those people who helped us along the way, I graciously accept this award. So thank you for the recognition.
Can we do a picture? Can you, let's see if we can sort of angle this in and we'll get a really good shot. I think we might have to come this way, or maybe we'll go this way, yeah. And then, Christine, if you can come on in. Of course you've got your photographers. Are there about 50 on the run? I think so. Yeah. Perfect. Can we just do one more, Christine, just right over here, and we'll get everybody looking at you? Yeah, get in here. Come on in. Or Christine, you can take a shot. Perfect. I'll grab one. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Colleagues, a truly inspiring story, and it's a London story. And I think that Teresa and her group have plans to grow this program, not just across London, but right across Ontario. I'd like to tell Teresa that I can also run 100 kilometers. It just takes me about 20 days. Let's move on through the agenda here. We'll look for disclosures of pecuniary interests.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to declare conflict on the third report of Planning and Environment Committee with respect to planning for supervised consumption sites and overdose prevention sites. That's number 14, and that is because my employer is very involved in this, and he came forward to discuss. With respect to the second report of the Community and Protective Services Committee, number 3, business licensing bylaw, adult entertainment locations. It's an updated map, but my staff are involved in inspecting those facilities. With 6D, 6 is the apportionment agreement between the City of London and Middlesex County. Clause D deals with child care and early years centres. My wife is an employee of one of the Ontario Early Years Centres, Child Reach. And there are 3 associated bylaws, bylaws 61, 63, and 64.
Thank you. Colleagues, any other conflicts? Okay, there are none. Review of confidential matters to be considered in public. There are none. So we'll look to move into closed session. It's 4:18 now. We're going in closed session for the reasons outlined on the agenda, and I'll just turn to Clerk Saunders to see if there are any additional. One moment, please, Deputy Mayor Hubert.
one additional.
Okay.
There is one additional reason as a result of yesterday's Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. And it is a matter pertaining to instructions and directions to officers and employees of the corporation pertaining to a proposed acquisition or disposition of land, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, reports or advice or recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation pertaining to a proposed acquisition or disposition of land, commercial and financial information supplied in confidence pertaining to the proposed acquisition or disposition of land, the disclosure of which could reasonably be expected to prejudice significantly the competitive position or interfere significantly with the contractual or other negotiations of the corporation, result in similar information no longer being supplied to the corporation, where it is in the public interest that similar information continue to be so supplied, and results in undue loss or gain to any person, group, committee, or financial institution or agency, commercial information related to the proposed acquisition or disposition that belongs to the corporation that has monetary value or potential monetary value, information concerning the proposed acquisition or disposition whose disclosures could reasonably be expected to prejudice the economic interest of the corporation or its competitive position, information concerning the proposed acquisition or disposition whose disclosures could reasonably be expected to be injurious to the financial interest of the corporation, and instructions to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the corporation concerning the proposed acquisition and disposition.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Sorry, my apologies for being a little slow on the draw here, but on the second report of Community Protective Services, item 6B, and only on B, please, pertaining to Ontario Works and the agreement with Middlesex County. Although remote, I'll declare a conflict on that because I'm executive director of a social service agency that works with OW.
Thank you. Okay, the motion to go into closed session has been moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Morgan. There are no speakers, so I'm going to call the question. We are voting.
Councillor Van Holst?
Sorry, I've got no buttons.
Yay?
Vote yay.
Okay. So manual vote yay.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, those watching from home, we will be in closed session until latest 5:15. We might be out a little bit earlier than that. Also, colleagues, we're expecting a number of guests from Dr. Mackey's opioid working group, and planning is up first. I'm trying to get clause 14 as close to 5:15 as we can, so we'll take handle of that as we work our way through the planning agenda. So we'll see you in committee room 3. Okay, colleagues, let's look to confirmation and signing of the minutes, second meeting held on January 16th, 2018. It's been moved by Councillor Helmer, it's been seconded by Councillor Morgan. Any discussion? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
And now communications and petitions for 1 and 2. There are some procedures that we need to work our way through. And I'll ask Clerk Saunders to guide us through that. You'll see a series of motions come up on screen.
Yes, Your Worship, both communications 1 and 2 have to deal with expropriation matters. Communication 1, we will require a motion to have council convene as the approving authority under the Expropriation Act for the purpose of considering communications number 1 from the Managing Director, Corporate Services and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, and the Managing Director, Planning and City Planner with respect to the expropriation of the lands for the project known as the Medway Valley Trail Master Plan Project located north of Fanshawe Park Road.
Moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Usher. Any discussion? Call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0. And Your Worship, the next step is you are now sitting as the approving authority, and we're asking the approve authority to consider the recommendations of staff contained in the staff report contained in communication number 1. And that recommendation is that on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, and the Managing Director, Planning and City Planner, with the concurrence of the Manager, Environmental and Parks Planning, and on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, the following actions be taken with respect to the expropriation of the lands for the project known as the Medway Valley Trail Master Plan Project, located north of Fanshawe Park Road. A, the Council of the Corporation of the City of London as approving authority pursuant to the Expropriations Act as amended hereby approves the proposed expropriation of lands as described in Appendix A, appended to the staff report dated January 30th, 2018 in the City of London, County of Middlesex. It being pointed out that the reason for making this decision are as follows. The subject lands are required by the Corporation of the City of London for the Medway Valley Trail Master Plan Project and to complete the permanent pathway to the city's accessibility standards as approved by Municipal Council Medway Valley North, option 5B, further enhances accessibility and community connections, and B, that a certificate of approval be issued by the city clerk on behalf of the approving authority in the prescribed form, it being noted that a request for hearing of necessity was received and for the parcel of land included in the above noted Appendix A. However, the hearing was ultimately canceled by the property owner as outlined in the letter appended as Appendix C to the staff report dated January 30th, 2018.
And that has been moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Usher. Any discussion? Call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0. And the third step in the process is a motion to have the approving authority adjourn and that City Council reconvene in regular session.
Be up on screen in a moment. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, we have some additional communications, 3, 4, and 5. Oh, we got to do number 2. Please, go ahead. Getting ahead of myself here. Over to you, Clerk Saunders.
Thank you, Your Worship. Now, Council, as the Expropriation Authority, is to consider the same recommendation that the approving authority just approved to approve the expropriation.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Morgan, seconded by Councillor Usher. Any discussion? Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say just a couple words on this. This is an area in my ward, and I know a trail system that has been incomplete for quite some time. I wanted to thank Mr. Warner and his team for the work that they've done up to this point. Certainly, I know that you know, this next step in the process does not mean it's complete, and as noted in the report, we'll continue to negotiate with the property owner to find a reasonable or potentially reasonable compromise to acquiring or compensating for the lands. I also appreciate that the hearing of necessity did not have to proceed, so that there's a very reasonable municipal purpose for the acquisition of this land, and taking this next step in the process is not only something that I feel is appropriate and hope the council supports, but is also something the community is looking forward to seeing come to conclusion and completing the use of that important trail connection for all Londoners.
Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, now we can go 3, 4, and 5. Also, there's an added, number 6. This is related to the property located at 660 Sunningdale Road East, the Applewood subdivision. A motion will come up on screen. If it's not already, there it is. Let's open that up. It's been moved by Councillor Cassidy and seconded by Councillor Helmer. Thank you. And let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, motions of which notice is given. There are none. I'm going to hand things over to the Chair of the Planning and Environment Committee for the third report.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and fellow members of council. I'd like to present this third report of the Planning and Environment Committee. We would put the balance on the floor, save number 9 and 14, unless there are others that people would like pulled.
Deputy Mayor Hubert, did you have any clauses that you wanted pulled?
13.
Do you want that pulled?
Yeah.
Okay. So 9, 13, and 14, Chair? Okay, so this is 1 through 8, 10 through 12, 15 to 18. Inclusive, with the exception of 9, 13, and 14, of course. This is moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Usher.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah. Okay, a question? Go ahead. On which clause? Your microphone, please. On which clause, Councillor?
Item number 18.
On 18. Okay, please go ahead.
Just the latter part of 18. It talks about, this is a report from the Agricultural Advisory Committee. and it talks about the Agricultural Advisory Committee requests, sorry, just let me read it here. With respect to communication dated January 15th from Dylan, appointed, related to Highway 401 and Highway 4 interchange improvement and Highway 4 Glenwood underpass. And then they ask for a number of different options. And I'm just wondering who is going to look after that, whether it's the committee that will send a note or council will send a note, because it says the ACC would like to see the final proposal accepted by the Ministry of Transportation to include the continuing maintenance and use of Glenwood Drive overpass. And I believe part of this is that the Glenwood Drive overpass may be taken out, and this is contrary. They're asking for something that is contrary. I believe that that's what it is. And I just wonder who is going to send this communication to the Ministry of Transportation, or this is just going to die right here.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the councillor for the question. Ultimately, these are advice to council and committee. Council received these, committee received these comments, but we haven't taken any direction to forward them on. I think perhaps through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Fleming might be worth a question to see if any other action might be indicated here.
Your Worship, I will defer to the city clerk on the action that they would take on this particular one.
Through Your Worship, generally if the standing committee wishes to endorse the recommendation of an advisory committee, they would put it forward as a motion with some action. If they don't want any action taken, they would just receive it. So based on what I see before me, it looked like the committee just wished to receive that clause. The only one requiring action is for the appointment.
Look, I respect all that. My concern is that, and I hear what the clerk is saying, I hear what everybody in here is saying, and that's exactly my concern. Because even if we receive it, this is, when these committees send this to the standing committee, I'm just wondering if they expect the standing committee to do something about it. Because if you read this, it says that they approve this information, and there are 3 clauses in there. What they approved is that the ACC is very concerned about safety in regards to any proposal that result in the closure of Glenwood Drive. And I know that they've been feeling this way for a long time, including the whole neighborhood. My concern is that they've said it there, and when they put it in this and we receive it, do they expect us as a municipality to send a letter to the provincial government? And that's where I'm coming from. I don't think that they expect us to just lay dead at this point.
Certainly understand your concern, Councillor. I think it's been explained a couple of times that the advisory committee has provided information and advice. The committee chose to receive that advice. If we support the committee's decision to receive that advice, there will be no further action taken. And so you had mentioned in your earlier comments that if this is just going to stop right here, then that's one thing, and I think that that's what the committee is recommending that we do. Go ahead. Yep, Chair.
If I may, Your Worship, usually there's action item wording in clauses from advisory committees, such as be requested, municipal council be requested, or the civic administration be requested or directed. None of that exists in the wording here, and so there were no action items associated with these clauses.
Is that to your satisfaction, Councillor? Okay, good. Councillor Helmer?
I hesitate to draw out the discussion on this one. The way the recommendation from the advisory committee is worded is awkward. It says that the forwarding of the following comments, et cetera, be approved. That is what we passed at committee. That is what is before us at council. I agree that it's awkwardly phrased. Forwarding to whom? would be the question. I believe their intention is that it be forwarded to the ministry who is leading the project and contacted them about the project. That's their feedback. I'm quite happy to forward it on. It's not my feedback, it's their feedback.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Helmer. I would ask the clerk, I guess then procedurally, typically we haven't created a venue for advisory committees to provide correspondence directly to ministries in the past.
That's correct. Through you, Mr. Mayor, which clause of the ACE report are you referring to?
It's the Agricultural Advisory Committee, Clause 9.
Thank you. Yeah, generally, we do not, the advisory committee's role is to provide recommendations to council through this standing committee. They don't directly provide comments on their own.
Councillor Helmer? All set? Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, and I don't know if this helps at all, but in Part A of that clause, it speaks of a letter that the chair of the Agricultural Advisory Committee is requested to draft. So the chair be requested to draft a letter to the Honourable J. Leal, Ministry of Agriculture. So the way I read it when the report was before us was this was all part and parcel of the letter that the chair of that committee has been requested to draft.
Through you, Your Worship, I believe that that letter was with respect to Clause 6, the Bees Act, which was a separate one. So that, but it draws out an important point and distinction between the clauses, where there's a direct request for a letter to be drafted and forwarded to the ministry, and another one for comments to just be approved. And so that's where we find ourselves in a bit of a predicament here.
Through Mr. Mayor, I agree that it is with Councillor Helmer that it is oddly worded. I would take it that there is that by council or by planning committee moving this forward with the word be approved in it, that there is direction for us to do something with that. So we will, in the clerk's office, do something with this and move it forward.
Thank you, Ms. Saunders. It's appreciated.
Not at all, Councillor. All right. Any other speakers? Let's call it. Yeah, absolutely, Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did want to bring attention to item 7, which is proposed regulations promoting inclusionary zoning, the Promoting Affordable Housing Act in 2016. We had a discussion about this. This was a consent item, and it was an item to forward comments to the ministry with respect to the proposed changes, allowing for inclusionary zoning and the parameters under which inclusionary zoning would be implemented. I think this is a really important tool for us as a municipality to be able to start to achieve our objectives, especially those in the London plan of 25% of new housing in the built area boundary to be affordable. And we have a few ways of doing that. We can go via bonusing, we can go via inclusionary zoning, we can use our Housing Development Corporation. There's a lot of tools and levers, but this is an important one. I think one of the thing that caught me the most was that the province wanted to set a maximum of 5% of inclusionary zoning within that area, or 10% within a primary transit area. Those two are relatively low compared to our targets and within our official plan of 25%. And so our comments that we've recommended forwarding on to the ministry and include making reference to that best practices say much more than that, typically 15-20% and onwards from there. So I just wanted to draw attention to council of that clause and those regulations in general. I think if implemented appropriately, they could be very successful. If implemented as proposed, it would have very limited applicability and impact in our objectives.
Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
Thank you, committee. And with respect to number 9, there's an amendment in the clause, and I think that is to be distributed. You may have received it all. Oh, it's being distributed now. Basically, staff have worked with the proponent to try and find a compromise on one of the sticking points within the recommendation. They need the zoning with respect to the clauses to be referred back. Perhaps through you, Your Worship, I'd put it over to Mr. Fleming to give a bit of an explanation, or sorry, Mr. Kostovitz.
Mr. Kostovitz.
From here.
Through His Worship, yes, that's correct. We've had further dialogue with the applicant, and I think we're approaching a reasonable solution to the particularly the zoning issue, which is the ground floor residential to the BDC zone. So we'd like the opportunity just to bring that back probably at the next PEC cycle with the amended bylaw and some rationale, some planning rationales to justify the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Kostovitz. And with the remainder of the clause, which needs to be passed, there were temporary extensions that were approved, and those need to be able to go forward in order for those not to expire. So we need to have passage of those tonight, allow for this to be referred back to committee and dealt with in the next cycle.
Councillor Cassidy. Okay, any other speakers? Excellent. That's been moved by the ward councillor and seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any further discussion? Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
Thank you, and I believe I'm putting 13 on the floor next. Oh, 9 as amended.
One of your very first council meetings ever. Okay, 9 is amended. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 12-0.
I'd like to place 13 on the floor.
Okay, I believe it was Deputy Mayor Hubert that pulled 13.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've done a little bit of research on this site, and I'm kind of concerned. This has been before council, not this council, but councils past, and several times past, actually. And the property isn't getting any better to a large degree. As a matter of fact, there's a letter on file from 2001, some 17 years ago, that talked about the condition of the property. And I'm a little concerned. I understand the need for us to protect, conserve heritage, and it does have a history to it. Most buildings do. But often when buildings like this were built, they weren't necessarily built to last. They were built for a utilitarian purpose. And I'm concerned, Mr. Mayor, that by turning this demolition down, this request down, some of the opportunities to go forward and build something that would be in addition to the character of the community, to the context of the community also go away. I know it passed unanimously, so I know I may be, all alone crying in the wilderness, but I have some concern about this. I mean, Latch, it's very easy to say, designate, do not demolish, but they never answer the question, what do we do with it? What does the owner do with it, and at what cost? And we've had this conversation around this horseshoe before on other properties, but Mr. Mayor, I won't support this. at this time. I think we need to look at how do we distinguish. I mean, the properties on one side have, you know, some real character, but this was a very functional building, probably built to service the garrison at the time, but it was not built to last for 200 years. So through you to the chair, I'd like to have a little bit more context of why we think this building should be retained.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. We had a good and robust discussion about this at committee. The recommendation comes from staff. It's supported by Latch. It's not a question specifically of the aesthetics or the condition of the building itself. It talks about its historical context and its existence within a heritage conservation district, which is a very important component of this. If you noticed in the report, it talked about, sorry, through you, Your Worship, that the previous two demolition applications both were refused at those times, pending something else coming forward. You asked, what do we do with this? Nothing has been proposed that's been viable at this point. And so demolition application is certainly, I guess I can't speak on the committee. I would speak on my own behalf. Certainly premature at this point. I think that was part of the nature of the discussion that we had at committee.
So back through you, Mr. Mayor, to the chair. I saw a proposal that went to the urban design panel last September. Did that come forward to committee, or has that been forwarded to committee? Maybe you could refresh my memory.
Through you, Your Worship, an application was made on the site for approval of something called micro suites. That was rejected by the committee and by council.
And the micro suites were not viable, or not aesthetically viable, or not fitting in our zoning. And if you need to look to Mr. Kosovas for clarification on that, that's good with me too.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll start, and perhaps Mr. Kosovas and Mr. Fleming can continue from that, but it was not consistent with the official plans. The density, the usage, the minimum lot coverage, the parking, there was a number of areas in which the application did not meet the tests of our official plan, and therefore wasn't considered viable for moving forward.
Okay, I'll accept that. I don't think I need much more.
I do want to thank you colleagues for that almost filibuster, because I made a commitment to Dr. Mackey and his team that we wouldn't hear his item until 5:15, and that brought us much closer to 5:15 than I thought we were going to be. Any other discussion? Okay. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to call the question.
That's my best, Jimmy Stewart.
We're voting.
Councillor Salee.
It's okay, I can vote from here for you.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 10-2.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues. Dr. Mackey, we can hold this until 5:15 unless you think that your group is here. Thank you very much for being here. I'm going to hand things back over to the chair. And the chair is going to hand things over to
Indeed.
probably Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. At this point, I will take my leave and ask Councillor Hopkins to present item 14.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to present number 14 on the planning report, the planning for supervised consumption facilities and temporary overdose prevention sites. So Dr. Mackey is here with us tonight, and he was at planning presenting the working group's update on consumption sites in the City of London. This was supported by planning. We are changing our council policy here to allow for these consumption sites, as well as amending our official plan and zoning bylaw. So I It was supported by committee. We did make a revision on the temporary site to allow it to stay up to 2 years. It was recommended 3 to 6 months. So with that, I would like to put that motion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hopkins, speakers, please. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. Speaking with Brian Lesser, who's in charge of regional HIV/AIDS, they're pleased to fill in for this, do this on a temporary basis. Also, just as a point of reassurance, many of the people that might be visiting this site already visit that location. And the neighbors who are also in the building say they've never had a problem with that. People come in through the front door and they'll leave through the back. So I think there's a degree of discreetness here, although many people don't think downtown is a great location for this. I think we're certainly doing the best we can for a temporary site.
I have no additional speakers. Councillor Helmer.
I just wanted to say I think this is a good step forward. Obviously, it would be better if we were not having to create temporary overdose prevention sites at all, because people were not dealing with the addictions that they have, and we didn't have contamination of the drug supplies like we see. This is not the last time we're going to be talking about different aspects of the opioid and other drug addiction crises that we're having in the city, but this is one thing that we can do at the city council level that's going to help reduce some of the harms that are happening in the community. I'm glad to see that it looks like it's going to be unanimous support for the idea of a council policy. I look forward to the ongoing discussion around the official plan policies and the zoning.
Other speakers? Okay, I've noticed no speakers. I'm going to speak very briefly from the chair. We had a very good discussion at committee. I want to recognize that Dr. Chris Mackey is here, as is Chief John Perry. And these are two people of a very large and impressive team who have come together to deal with this crisis that our community is facing, that communities are facing right across the country. As Councillor Helmer pointed out, this isn't a solution, this is a harm reduction tool, and it's essential that the police be at the table, and they have been every step of the way. The other folks that I think we need to recognize are our city staff, our senior leadership team. Many of them have been working with this group to make sure that that this work is moving forward, and it's a community effort. And I think that it's a really good example of city staff, community leaders working together to deal with a crisis that has seen, at this point, as far as I'm aware, 5 deaths in our community since the beginning of the year, and 3 just a short time ago in 1 week. So thanks for being here. Thank you for the work that you're doing. If you could pass that on to your colleagues as well, on behalf of council, I'd appreciate it. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you for those comments, and you're right, we had a big discussion about this at planning, and I guess I'd just like to leave it with a few words that Dr. Mackey had sort of said in his announcement about respect and love, and I think that is really what we as a council are doing here with creating the site to take care of our community. So with that, I'd like to have it moved.
Thank you. Other speakers? Okay, it's been moved by Councillor Hopkins. I'm going to call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11-0.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of the planning report. Thank you for coming this evening. You're welcome to stay. Those are some hard no's from up in the gallery. We're on the second report of the Community and Protective Services Committee. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm prepared to put the entire report on the floor unless any of my colleagues would like something pulled.
Conflict on 3.
Okay.
And 6.
So I'll put, and so 3, 6, and 9, please, and then Your Worship, Councillor Ushers.
So Councillor Usher would like to address 4. I think we're moving the entire report with the exception of 3, 6, and 9, and then I'll give you an opportunity to address 4, Councillor. And you want 5 as well, okay? So we're moving 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, 10 through 16. Okay, that's been moved by Councillor Cassidy. I'll go to Councillor Usher for Clause 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I attended the CSC committee meeting and I made some positive statements in this regard with respect to the subject. Since then, I've had some discussions or some calls from some of the people in the community, and they said, not so fast. So I still think that it's a positive thing, but I think that what the community is saying is that we've got to do better than what we're doing. And some of the things that they pointed out was to do with the proportion of the workforce in a workplace as compared to the demographics of the community. And this is part of what I stated at my meeting, in my statement. However, what people are saying to me is that this is just not enough because the difference between...
Councillor, respectfully, I'm going to have to stop you there. It's a different committee report that you're referring to. You're referring to Corporate Services Committee. But I think that was a good start and
Which one are we doing?
A serious conversation that we can circle back to. We're doing the second report of the Community and Protective Services Committee. Thank you. But
I thought we were doing CSC.
We'll get to you right away.
That's why I mentioned CSC right at the beginning. Thank you.
So clause 1, 2, and 4, 7 to 8, and 10 through 16. Call the question. It's been moved by Councillor Cassidy. Okay. Councillor Usher.
It's the report from DAC. Just a second.
Clause 12?
11. No, it's 11.
Clause 11.
And it's specifically D, Mr. Chair. And I will ask the clerk if she will kindly give this out at the moment to each member of council. The reason why I want to address this, Mr. Chair, is that I generally do this at the beginning of the meeting at this time of the year. And but since DIAC addressed it and they did not have the details, I thought I would leave it until this point in time. Because it says in D that they provided that somebody be requested to provide an update to the Black History Month activities of the next meeting of DIAC. And if that was here, then I wouldn't have to say everything that I wanted to say, but I generally identify and remind this council and remind the public that February is Black History Month. And it is a very important month in a Canadian standard, in a North American perspective. And we, particularly in London, celebrate this month. And I'm sharing with you on behalf of the Black History Coordinating Committee some of the activities that are taking place here. They started this last week, and if you look on this sheet, it talks about celebrating Flowers and Thorns on January 26th. It's an excellent play of 6 women who were leaders in the Black community over the years, long before you and I were here. And they're trailblazers. And one of these 6 women are on a stamp. I don't remember which stamp, but one of the Canadian stamp. One will be on the $10 bill. I think it's the year 2020. These are the 2 of the 6 people. But they were in a heavenly atmosphere. And they were talking about the things that they accomplished while they were here and how some of us are following in their footsteps. So I just want to do that. But the other part about this is that on Black History Month starts tomorrow. And as usual, there's an opening ceremony on the 3rd, which will be held at the Museum London. And Mr. Chair, you generally either attend or you send a representative. And the closing gala will be on Sunday, February the 25th, from 4 to 6. And some of you may or may not know, but I was responsible for that for 12 years until I gave it up about 4 years ago to some of the newcomers into the organization. But a lot of other things that are not here are also taking place. So I'm asking you to remember that these things are happening. And whenever you have the opportunity to attend 1 or 2 of them, do so, because it's very historic. And most of them are educational. It tells you a little bit about the Black history, where I come from, where some of my ethnic origin people come from, including the Underground Railroad and some cases where we're going. I think it's very, very important because Black history is a part of Canadian history, and it's very important that we accept that, understand it, and embrace it. So it all form a part of what I call the cultural minority or the visible minority, but it's specifically for the Black population. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention and share this sheet with you. If you want to attend any of these, and if you want any more information, I'm sure we can find it. I was given this. I'm not a part of this committee anymore, but I promote it as much as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to say that.
Thank you, Councillor Rusher. Other speakers? Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Okay, Your Worship, I'll put Clause 3 on the floor, and I believe we have a conflict on that.
Okay. Clause 3.
Clause 3 is the business licensing bylaw.
Yeah.
Okay, it's been moved by the chair. Any speakers? Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 1 recuse.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I will put Clause 5, which is the vehicle for hire bylaw, the 6-month statistics that were presented to committee by Mr. Katolik.
Speakers. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Worship. Your Worship, I guess the thing is this vehicle for hire, as you know, well, everyone here knows that, you know, we changed legislation. The whole industry's been turned upside down. There are many, many more people out there. Now there's cabs, limos, and of course, the others, such as Uber, etc. And Your Worship, this report is, what I got from this report, the long and the short of it is, and I've talked about this before, about how big the pie was, and now there's so many more people out there, so many more people. I guess our staff can probably give you a number of the total, I don't have it here, but a total number of licensed people out there ready to transport other people. It's, I think it's tripled or more. I think in January we were told there was 1,000 new licenses, 1,500 altogether, on top of what was already out there. And you remember when this whole industry and we set up the regulations, it was, you know, and I hope our staff can spend a minute on this. There was so many vehicles for so many people. Now we've got a different scenario, so many more vehicles for the same group of people. And the reason why I'm rising on this, there will be a further report. We're gonna get more numbers, and then we're gonna have the exact picture. This is just a snapshot, not the full picture yet. But why I'm standing here today is that I can tell you the drivers, the owners of vehicles who also drive, plus their drivers, etc. I'm hearing out there that there is an extreme amount of stress. They've seen their incomes disintegrate. And I went on the internet. The average cab driver, I think, makes between 30, across Canada, the average is between $30,000 and $40,000 a year. So if the trend is what I thought it is they've lost 40% of their income. And you've all heard this speech before, so I won't continue on that. These people are in serious trouble. Now, of course, it gets to the point when you're a small business person, and you're not making enough money, it's problematic. You can't just run off and collect unemployment. It's not like a regular job when you're a small business person. Many on council are business people. If we don't make money this week, that's the way it is. And so I'm just wondering, they're not unionized, so they don't have the benefit of a union recognizing there's a problem there, a plant closure, and trying to make sure there's help out there for them in different areas. And again, it's just the industry. I don't think there's a lot of help out there. So I wanted to ask through you to our staff, is there an opportunity for our staff to liaison with the brokers and make sure that that there's some way of making sure that if anybody finds themselves in stress, they'll know where to go, where help is available, counseling, advice, because I don't want to come back here in the future and tell other stories or start telling stories about misfortune and people under stress, financial stress. It affects them, it affects their family. So I don't want to miss out on this opportunity to make sure our staff, if they can they reach out and work with those brokers just to make sure there's some support there.
Mr. Kotsvas.
Through your worship, we do regularly meet with the industry and its brokers, drivers, and some of the representatives as well. I believe there's even a meeting even tomorrow with respect to personal health or stress or any of those types of issues. We do not get involved in that type of program. That is typically to the individual or the owners and operators of the businesses for their own staff.
I don't, Your Worship, I'm not asking that, the city provides support services through our staff or anything. I'm just asking if there's an opportunity to direct them and make sure that the brokers have information available that they can pass on, and that there's some way of making sure that these people have support if they need it, where to go. And Mr. Koskis, I'm not looking for that, but more along the lines of Mrs. Livingston or someone else, if they could work with Mr. Koskis, or if they have staff that could make sure pamphlets, phone numbers, whatever, that's out there.
Thank you. You're just at 5 minutes, Councillor. I'm just looking to see if there was any response from staff. I think, Councillor, you raise an important issue about compassion and about ensuring that everyone in our community is treated with respect and dignity and access to services when they need them. And I think that Ms. Livingston, Ms. Daters-Beers would be available to help connect people with services if necessary. You're just past 5 minutes, Councillor. You've made a very compelling comments, and I thank you for those. I'm going to look for other speakers now. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in response to the councillor's comments, just last week, there was the opening of a new program at the White Oaks Family Center, Insight, and on Thursdays, they're open for counseling and family counseling just on a drop-in basis. So those kinds of very important services are available in the city, and people are certainly encouraged to take advantage of them.
Thank you. I'll move to Councillor Squire now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. To focus on the report itself and what it shows, I thought it was very interesting. The first thing that I gleaned from it was that it shows that the pie in terms of total number of trips is increasing. That we were told that it usually averages or has averaged about 3 million rides a year. And based on the 6-month figures, we're looking at possibly going about 3.6 million rides a year, which means that what the ride sharing was telling us, which that it would grow the number of rides, seems to be occurring. So the pie has not stayed the same, it is growing. And that's a phenomenon that people are seeing across North America when you bring ride sharing in. It becomes a very popular mode of transportation, no question about it. And no question about it that it has impacts that are fairly pointed out on cabs and also public transportation, both of them. And that's something we're going to have to watch, and these statistics are going to be very important moving into the future as we plan our public transit and all the other things we do. How is ride sharing going to impact that? The demand for it and otherwise. Certainly, anecdotally, many of us know, including myself and my family, I have teenagers who prefer and make the choice to use a ride-sharing option on occasions rather than public transit. And we have to accept that, and we have to move on with it. The other thing that's in there, and that I asked Mr. Katolik, was whether people can hold multiple licenses. So if you look at the total number of licenses, it could be a little misleading. For instance, someone could have a cab license and also a ride-share license. So it's going to be important looking at this in the future.
Other speakers? Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me, but I need to follow up on what Councillor Armstrong was asking about, because I think that it's very, very important. I think that what Councillor Armstrong is looking for is identification of places and literature that people can go to. I know what Councillor Van Holst is talking about. There's only one of that. I was at that function last week, and they do have facilities open on Thursdays from, I think it's from noon until 6. But I think that there are more places, and I think that what Councillor Armstrong is asking for is just to be able to say to these folks that here is a place that you could go to, here is some literature that you can get. And I would really like to hear staff identify something to that effect.
Ms. Livingston.
Through your worship, there are a number of points of access for individuals in our community. We have a tool that we use with a number of our clients called Help Yourself Through Hard Times. I'm happy to provide Mr. Kotsovas and his team access to those resources. We can also provide information about other ways to access support through 211 and a number of other avenues in our community. So I'm very happy to work with Ms. Datersbeer and make sure that our colleagues have those resources to provide to community members that may need assistance in accessing support.
Thank you, Ms. Livingston. Mr. Kotsovas?
Through His Worship, I'll convey the information to Mr. Katolik, and as part of their meetings, we'll ensure that information is passed through.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors, for bringing that up. I have no additional speakers at this time. I know the chair wants to wrap up. Go ahead, Chair.
Thank you, Worship. And I'm glad that Councillor Squire brought up transit and the going forward, how we're going to integrate all these different modes of getting around the city. So anecdotally, as he spoke to the anecdotal evidence that he's heard, I've also heard that anecdotally, young people that are standing at a transit stop waiting for a bus, and the many times that it happens in peak periods when the bus just blows by the stop because it's already full, that's when a lot of these young riders pull out their phones and call an Uber. So that's why it's really important that we get on board with BRT, that we make it the wonderful public transit system that we know it will be. And I also just want to make a comment about this particular report. It's 6-month statistics. It's really just a snapshot in time, and it misses a lot of things. It misses the owner renewals that are collected annually in October, as well as the broker and TNC renewal fees that are collected in October, and it also misses the busy months around the Christmas season of November and December. So Mr. Katolik has committed to us that he will come forward after a full year's data is available and present another report to us at that time.
Thank you. If there are no additional speakers, I'll call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll put item 6 on the floor. I believe there was also a conflict on that one.
Any speakers on 6? Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, Your Worship, just to ask if, I think D for myself to be called separately, and I think Councillor Hubert was seeking B to be called separately so we could do our recusals. The balance of it, there's no issue.
Sure. So let's call the entire clause with the exception of B and D. Okay, clause 6 excluding B and D, moved by the chair, Councillor Cassidy. Let's call the question. Voting.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Sure, I'll move item B from that clause.
Any discussion on B? Call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 1 recuse.
Okay, D has been moved. Any discussion? We are voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11 with 1 recuse.
So I will put clause 9 on the floor, and it was a submission from Councillor Sali requesting that the committee recommend renaming Paul Haggis Park. The committee voted to receive the submission from Councillor Sali.
Councillor Sali.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's from my understanding at this time, I can't raise my motion. I didn't have a seconder at that time. So procedurally, all I can do at this stage is to vote against the receive, or I just want to get clarified to get my intended.
Councillor, I'm going to suggest from the chair that had the committee supported a motion to receive and take no action, that would have been a clear direction from the committee, and if you brought forward a separate motion, it would be contrary. The way this is worded now, to be received, I'm going to suggest that you could provide an amendment, received, and then present an action, if you like.
Great. So then in that case, I'd like to receive and amend to bring the motion that's already in the letter, which is to have the park renamed, to go back to the renaming policy committee, and in the interim change to 5370 Bateman Trail, I believe is the address, 2875. So I'll put that motion on the floor, and then should I wait to speak on it now, or I'll wait till the motion's up?
So you can speak on it in just one moment, provided there's a seconder. So this is an amendment to bring forward the proposal that Councillor Salee had identified in a letter. We'll get the wording up on screen as soon as we can. It's been moved by Councillor Salee. It's been seconded by Councillor Helmer. So Councillor Salee, you have the floor, and I'll start the clock now.
I'll just wait till the end.
Okay, that's fine. Are there any other speakers?
Point of order.
Point of order, go ahead.
So help me understand this, Mr. Mayor, if you could. It seems that the committee's intent was very clearly to take no action. That's why they just received it. And now we've got a motion on the floor that seems contrary to the intent of the committee, based on the reports that I have seen here. So if I could, through the chair, if I could get some clarification on what happened at committee.
Councillor, you've risen on a point of order, and I've made a ruling that received without any further direction, like take no action, opens the door for any council member to bring forward an additional amendment. It's not unlike the debate that we had yesterday related to the international plowing match. And I think that all of us may learn about making motions at committee after experiencing that last evening, to be as clear as we can with the intent of the motion. But that's my
I'm
ruling.
not, my intent is not to challenge the chair.
Okay, you have an option to
Yeah.
challenge the chair, but I think that.
If that's the point of order issue.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers on the matter? Councillor Usher.
Well, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, this is still contrary, though. Are we allowed a contrary motion to the committee's intent?
I understand the confusion, Councillor, and I'm ruling that it's not contrary because the committee is supporting a recommendation to receive. Had they said to receive and take no further action, then I would suggest that an amendment would be contrary. Because the committee is only recommending that this be received, it opens the door for any member of council to bring forward an amendment at council. And so I'm ruling that it's not contrary. If you disagree, you're more than welcome to challenge the chair. And there'd be no disrespect at all. Please, feel free. Okay, thank you. Okay, any speakers?
Point of clarification.
Point of clarification.
Then, so yes, Your Worship. So what will happen is we'll vote first on adding this amendment, and then we'll vote on the entire, and then at that point, we could separate A and B and vote against that. There would be two opportunities to vote against the amendment.
Yeah, I guess we're sort of moving into theoretical. If the majority of council voted to support the amendment and then wanted to have the original amendment, or the original motion as amended, split, then the majority of council could then vote against the amendment that they voted in favor for. I think we'll have to wait and see if we get there. Any other points of clarification before we move to a speaker's list? Okay, I have Councillor Helmer as a speaker.
Our policy around naming and renaming provides for the circumstances in which we might reconsider the name of a building or other piece of municipal property. Under civic renaming section in the policy, it basically says that civic administration believes we should keep the names the same for the most part because it's important to preserve the historical integrity, but there are going to be times when we're going to want to change them and give some guidance on that front. There are two that are not relevant, frankly, for this particular topic. The third one, I believe, is. The third one says civic names may be changed if there are specific circumstances that arise which warrant a review. I believe that it's very clear that that has happened. There are extremely serious allegations against Paul Haggis. I think that that is enough to say we're going to review the name of this park. The standard for naming something after somebody is very high in our policy framework. It basically says that there needs to be community consensus, that that's fine. You have to actively go out and see if there are objections, and if there are, you have to resolve them to get something named after somebody in the City of London. And it makes perfect sense that that's why. It's one of the reasons we don't name things after politicians. Not everybody likes everyone, and naming things after people who are controversial is not a great way of unifying the community. I do not believe that it is necessary for a court in the United States to resolve a lawsuit before we can decide to review the name of one of our parks. I think the circumstances that have arisen now are enough to review the name. I don't think we should be naming parks after people who cause this kind of division in the community. That is the circumstances we're in. Whether that's fair to Mr. Haggis or not is not relevant. We are not a court of law. We are not trying him for something. We're naming municipal property. We have policy for it, and under the policy, we certainly can review it. We certainly can change it. And the standard for naming property after people is extremely high. I think it should be, and I think we need to drop this name, review it, name it after many of the other great things that are going on in London. Naming things after geographical features is a great way to avoid all kinds of controversy that might come up. It comes from naming it after people. So I think it's very clear that we should do it. I realize that this itself is controversial. There are people who think, you have to provide the presumption of innocence. Nothing has been proven, and so we shouldn't do anything that would be unfair to Mr. Haggis. I get where people are coming from there. But we have to follow the policy that's in front of us. We're talking about naming a park. Is this an appropriate name for the park given the circumstances that we find ourselves in? I would say no. I encourage my colleagues to support that direction from Councillor Salee.
Other speakers, please. Councillor Squire.
I have to say, first of all, I can't imagine or I can't think of a more distasteful subject that I've had, a more difficult conversation for me at council. And it takes me right to the basics of what my education is, what my profession is, and what I believe in. First of all, I just want to make it clear that, and I did this at council, or at committee, Councillor Helmer's interpretation of the bylaw and the policy, in my opinion, is completely wrong. What he's saying is a park's been renamed, and now, because of circumstances that he thinks have changed, we should be moving ahead to rename it. But let me just make it clear where we are here. We're in a situation where two parties have gone to court to settle a dispute. They have made a choice that they want the dispute between them adjudicated by a civil court, not by the City Council of the City of London. Mr. Haggis started a lawsuit against a woman. He takes the position that she tried to get money out of him by extortion. That she wrote a letter to him through her lawyer and said, if you don't give me $9 million, I'm going to sue you. He took the preemptive action. He felt so strongly about it that he sued her. He wasn't upset about getting it out into the public. He sued her. He wanted it out in the public. This person then came back, and rightly so, has now sued him for a sexual assault. There are also anonymous complainants who have come forward. I have to be clear that in any interpretation I have of fair play, law, or anything, if you're going to make an accusation against someone, it can't be anonymous. None of us, I'm sure, want to see that. None of us want to be accused by an anonymous person of something. The other thing that's in the lawsuit, quite frankly, is an interesting fact, which is that Mr. Haggis said he suffers from a serious back condition and had surgery just a short period of time before. And he couldn't do what he's alleged to have done. So you've got a very contentious lawsuit between two parties. The complainant has never come forward and said, I want anything other than money through this lawsuit. She hasn't said, I want Mr. Haggis exposed to the world. She's seeking money. It will be dealt with. It will be resolved one way or another. Both of these parties have been made it clear that there's not going to be any settlement or any saw-off, and we'll have a decision. And that's not beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not on it's criminal onus, that's a civil onus. We'll get a decision and then we can take steps. You know, a person that I have no real support for politically, the Prime Minister of Canada said today when talking about allegations of sexual misconduct in his caucus, said he was doing the best that he could do to balance support for victims while giving the accused their due process. Bravo for him. Bravo for him. That's what we need to do. The idea that what we're doing is not controversial or a big deal. Mr. Haggis is an internationally renowned filmmaker. He won Academy Awards. He also, and you should know this, started a charity in Haiti to support children in Haiti. He's had to step down from that charity. And it was taken over by two other people who, incidentally, the charity said nothing bad about Mr. Haggis, nor did the new people. We have to have this matter decided. We have to move back to a situation where there is some kind of due process.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I was at committee, and I said a few things at committee, and I was hoping I would not have to go through this again, but I will, because it is important. And I appreciate what Councillor Helmer says about our policies and about renaming and the process, but I don't think this is what this is about. And the reason I say that is because this park sits in my ward. No one has come to me upset, fearful. I did speak to Councillor Sully, and he was approached because that name made that person fearful. That's what I understood this letter and this reason for this change is about. And somehow, it's kind of taken a different life. I understand exactly, maybe we need to do our policies. I have a lot to say about that when we rename our parks, streets, bridges, about putting a lens on that and what fear is about and how we can make our communities safer for men and women. But I don't know if this is where we do that. And I would like to just say, to add to that, is, you know, I thank Councillor Sally for making this go to the committee for debate, and that's where it went. And so it was received, and we should have, the committee was not clear, but here we are at council. And again, I think this is too big a discussion to have and make changes to our policies. They should be done through committee. And I'm not going to go through my story, and I'm very sensitive to fear and what it is like. I've had situations in my life where I have experienced fear, and I do not take this lightly because it brings back lots of concerns. And we as a council, before I go on to we as a council, I want to say I've also been accused of things that I have not done, and I've had to defend myself. And that was not a good experience. It was humiliating, not only for me, but for my family, to have to defend myself that my life is a lie. But we have a legal system for that. And I'd like to, since we are at council, remind council that a year or two ago, we stood here and I listened very carefully to what my colleagues had to say about prejudging people. And we changed our policy around not prejudging. And I am really concerned that we may be going down a slippery slope here about prejudging. And I listened very carefully, and I was convinced that we should not do that as a council. So as much as I appreciate Councillor Helmer and where you are going with the policy and the changes, I don't really think the intent of this letter was that. And that's why I won't be supporting it.
Other speakers? Councillor Usher.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm really, really sorry that we have to discuss this at council. I thought that this was finished. I have had several letters about this, but none of them in support of this. It just seemed to me that we're a council, we're not God. And we're doing something that is far beyond us. I don't agree with Councillor Helmer at all. I think that he's stretching this way to the limit. That's his interpretation. It's certainly not my interpretation. And I don't believe that we know enough information and the facts about this situation for us to make a decision on this. And I think we ought to just leave it alone until the courts decide, and then we take action accordingly. I'm really sorry that we have to discuss this at this point in time.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I wanted to, I've thought about this a long time. It's in the media. People have been talking about it. The committee had a debate about it. I followed the debate. And for me, I certainly recognize all of the viewpoints that were discussed. And today, hearing a couple of my colleagues make discussions on this affirmed the direction and approach that I first thought that I wanted to take on this should it get to council. And it's what Councillor Usher just said and what Councillor Helmer said about the interpretation of the policy and what we see as how the policy should work. And for me, policy is important because policy allows us to apply things consistently. When we debate and change policy, we can do so with a process that involves the community, allowing for community standards to be set and discussed in a reasonable way. And so in that case, you can set the framework for a renaming or removing a naming. Based on public feedback. And that public can weigh in on what the threshold is for renaming. And in some cases, it may be very reasonable for the public to say, we want the threshold to be when an accusation is made that is of this level of serious nature. But I think that's for us to determine and then apply consistently through a proper process. And that if there's not clarity in the way that our policy is meant to be applied, then we should fix that. We should set that policy, and then we should apply it very consistently across all of the assets that we have. There are lots of things named after lots of different people all across the city in different ways and for different timeframes, through different processes. And if we're going to go through reviewing those in any sort of significant way, we should probably ensure that our policy is sound, understood, accepted by a majority of council, invokes community standards and thresholds, and then apply it very consistently and administratively. Because even in the renaming sections of the policy, which I would describe as relatively weak, it talks about, you would rename that it should not be changed unless an exceptional situation, and it can be proven that a majority of the local committee are in support of the change. And that's really contemplating like a changing of the name. In this case, it's more of a withdrawal of the name, and I don't see where that's really contemplated in any sort of way in the policy. So I don't know, I've certainly heard lots of viewpoints in the community. I've certainly heard lots of viewpoints here tonight. I always back to I'd like to be able to apply the next situation very consistently. And for me, I would much rather see the committee debate strengthening and improving the policy to have conditions under which we would remove a named civic asset so that it could be applied consistently. So I prefer not to support the direction as it's outlined today on a specific asset. But I would very much be in support of engaging in the discussion on setting those community standards under which we would take away a civic naming and apply them consistently.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor. I'm advised by the clerk that Governance Working Group is working on all of the policies, including this one, and so that could be an appropriate spot to bring this forward. Any other speakers? Okay, I have Councillor Salida wrap up, and okay. Is that good? Okay, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. So first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about what happened at committee. I didn't comment at committee. And as chair, I didn't move take no action because I couldn't, and I didn't invite the committee to take no action because I understand what an important conversation this is, and I understand how important this is to Councillor Sully and Councillor Helmer, and I knew full well that this would come forward at council. So I just want to address a comment that Councillor Squire made about anonymous complaints. And I understand why women don't come forward. I understand the desire to remain anonymous. And recently, thank you, just last Friday, I was in a roundtable discussion, and because this had just been on committee that week, and because the Patrick Brown situation had been in the news, of course we spoke about the issue of sexual harassment. And as is often the case, there are two men that generally do the roundtable with me and two women, and when issues like this come up, Lisa Brandt, the co-host, and I usually give our perspective and our experiences as women, and so we did that on Friday. Later that afternoon, on the radio, 2 members of our local media then chose to frame an entire afternoon show around the comments that I made and invited vitriol and hate to be leveled at me on the radio. It's not the first time that this particular radio host has done this sort of thing to women, public figures that are women in the City of London. And they can say whatever they want to say is their reasoning behind it. Give whatever justification they like. But by bringing up past mistakes that I've made and that were reported very publicly as a reason for why I have no justification or authority to speak on the issue of sexual harassment and the kinds of things that women go through throughout their whole lives. That is completely unacceptable and a complete abuse of their power in reporting news, so-called news. So I just want to bring that up as a comment to consider, something to consider on why there are anonymous complaints, why it takes women so long to come forward. Because at every turn, there are men, usually, only too ready to shut us down, to shut us up. And by bringing up mistakes I've made in the past is definitely a way of marginalizing my voice and shutting me up. And it's painful. But that said, I voted along with the majority of the committee to receive Councillor Salih's communication and to not recommend anything further to council. I believe each and every case needs to be looked at separately, and I think that's what we have to do in this particular case. I agree with Councillor Helmer and Councillor Morgan and everyone else who has said we need to change the policy. I'm in favor of that. There's an old saying, maybe Councillor Squire can correct me, I think it's hard cases make bad law.
Yes.
And so I think we need to let this play out. I think we need to judge this case on an individual basis and move forward with the policy to avoid these kinds of situations in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Councillor Salih.
So first off, I want to thank my colleagues, Councillor Cassidy and Councillor Hopkins, for their strength. My intention was not to, to have this conversation with no intent to trigger anyone. I know this is a difficult conversation, but my goal was when I heard from women and girls in the community that this was important to them, I thought to try to be an ally, to amplify voices, and to use my male privilege to come here before committee to have that debate. I didn't have support at committee, and here at council, I was under the impression that I would just have to bring it forward and to vote against not being received, but I just learned of the opportunity that I could add an amendment here today. So that's why I made that intention, because I never want to look back years from today and say to myself that one other opportunity to do what I can for an issue that I've heard from women in the community is important, and people outside the community. For me, this isn't about his merits, what he's done, his good work, because the reality separate from him is I could do a lot of great things, but doesn't mean I'm immune from doing bad things outside of the good things I do day to day. So that has no bearing. What I'm bringing forward to my colleagues today is to say that right now, this park is not accessible for every single Londoner, period. Women and girls have said to me that they don't want to go to this park because that name triggers emotions, pain for them. And I want to do what I can to address that. I want to make sure that when we have said, as a council, we want to be a United Nations safe city, and I don't want us to speak, to speak kind of contrary to that to some people's and their perspectives. And I want to do what I can. Because the reality is this is a park that is paid for by taxpayer. This doesn't belong to one person. This isn't about naming rights. This isn't about something that anyone is entitled to. It's not a privilege. It's not a right. It simply comes down to a city park that everyone should be able to use. And I know I said this at committee as I use an example of, I can't imagine a young girl or a mother and a child coming to this park and having to answer those questions around these serious allegations, or to have a young boy, or picture myself as a young man coming to this park and with my friends and kind of pointing out the name and saying, this is the man who's being accused of these serious things. And the reality is, when we have a street name, a park name, or whatever it is, we are celebrating something. And right now we can't celebrate it because there's too many questions. We can wait for the courts. I don't know if that'll be 2 years. I don't know if that'll be 3 years. Or as Helmer had said during committee, maybe we'll never know the outcome. And then the park just remains. So for me, colleagues, I apologize, this is a difficult conversation, but at the same time, I don't apologize because it's an important conversation and a conversation we need to have, because I'm glad these difficult conversations are happening. And I think it is important for men to have those conversations, to stand as allies, to amplify, not be afraid of doing this. And I want to especially thank my colleague, Councillor Cassidy, because as I mentioned during committee, I got a small glimpse of what women and girls have to face when they speak up. From as early as speaking about Bill Cosby, before I was elected, before I was even sworn in, people asked me to resign, talked about lawsuits, talked about sexual assault threats, violence threats, all those things. Same kind of things happened again when I brought up Paul Haggis. It just blew my mind how just by saying something as simple as, don't have a show here today, or let's change this city-owned park that we pay for, could trigger so much nasty and strong animosity for members in our community. So I want to thank the women colleagues for doing the work that they do every day, because simply for existing, you guys are attacked. And simply for me just saying one little thing, it was a bombardment of nasty emails, correspondence, phone calls being stopped in the grocery stores. That's the world you live all and every single day. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for not backing down. So kudos to my colleagues around here. So I just want to sum up and say, I don't want any of my colleagues to feel as if this is, I'll be disappointed in how you decide to vote or what you may do, but I feel this is what I'm compelled to do based on the information I've heard, based on what I've heard from young women and girls in the community, that I can't not bring this forward, and that's why I'm here today, and I'll ask you for your support.
Thank you, Councillor Salee. Are there any additional speakers? This is on the amendment. I'm going to call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion is lost, 2-10.
And on the main motion. I'll call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 11-1.
Thank you, Chair. We're moving to the third report of the Corporate Services Committee. I'll look to the chair.
Thank you. Having had a heads up from Councillor Usher, I think item number 4 will be pulled. Otherwise, I'll put all the items on the floor.
Okay, I've got clause 3, clause 4. Okay. 1. Do you want a clause pulled, or are you going to speak to a clause? Okay, let's just deal with what we're pulling. Okay, and so we're going to pull clause 3 and clause 4. Anything else, colleagues? And 14. Councillors, if you could please use your microphones, if you'd like a clause pulled.
14.
14, okay. Chair, it looks like 3, 4, and 14.
Okay, I'll put the remaining clauses on the floor.
I'll go to Councillor Usher.
I just want, all I want to do is to talk about it. I don't want to pull it for, okay.
Okay, so my apologies, Chair, and councillors, please use your microphones. Councillor Van Holst, do you want 4 pulled?
I would pull 4.
Okay, so we're going to leave it as is. This is the balance of the report, exception of 3, 4, and 14. Okay, 1 to 2, 5 to 13, 15, and 16 have been moved by the chair. Any speakers? Let's call the question.
Councillor Squire? Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
I'll put 3 on the floor.
Speaker to 3, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm actually just going to ask that you separate the Part C, and that's the one I'll speak to. I'd like to vote against that, and I'd like to encourage my colleagues to vote against that too. It's asking Civic Administration be requested to report back with suggested methods and practices for determining the allocation of the funds that the city would realize. As a fourth-year counselor, now I think I've got a pretty good idea of methods and practices for determining allocation. I don't think I need that. I don't want the staff to go through that
Councillor,
work.
clause 3 has no parts. Can you refer which clause? Just review
Okay,
which
so
clause you're referring to.
CD. So we're at. Oh, you know what? I'm very sorry, Your Worship. I've got the SPPC in front of me now, and those were what I was looking for. So.
Okay.
Perhaps I'll try and put 3 and 4 on the floor.
I'd like to encourage my colleagues to support 3 and 4. Thank you.
That's been moved by the chair. Any speakers? We'll call the question. Oh, Councillor Usher on 4, please.
Thank you. And I'm supporting 4, but I just want to make some comments. And I have to repeat myself again, unfortunately, because at the beginning I thought that, oh yeah, sorry. Just remember where it comes from. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to make some comments on this, and I'm very positive about this in the first place. Just let me say that. But I made some positive remarks about this at committee because I was very happy to see the information here. However, some members of the community have come to me, have called me, have talked to me, and they say not so fast. And they say that, and I think I have to agree with them in certain respects, but I want to put it into perspective that I still support what we've done. I still want to thank the staff, but what I want to do is to put caution out there and say that we're just not there. And the there that we're talking about is that over the years, and I'll tell you, over the past 20 years, our visible minority community has increased from 8.9% to 19.9% as it is today. And we have lagged behind tremendously in the proportion or the demographics of our workforce in comparison to the community workforce. And that's where some of my community members, they're very concerned about because they don't know what we're doing. The census that we did within the city was responded to by 59% of the population, which, you know, the people are telling me that if the census, and I don't know how the census was done, but they're telling me that a good census, you'd have had 80% of the respondent. And that's, I'm not a professional in that sense. I thought that 60% was good because a lot of times I hear that if you get 35%, you're good. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that based on 60%, we got 14% of our workforce say that they're of ethnic origin. And the population out there, the community out there, my constituents, and not just my constituents, but right across London, they're telling me that that's not good enough. Because 14% is much too far from 19.9%. And that we need to do, and I think that our staff realize that we need to do something. It's a matter of what we do and how we do it. But I just want to bring that forth to council so that we understand that there are people out there who feel that this is not satisfactory. There are people out there who feel that we're not doing a good enough job to increase that workforce proportion closer to the proportion in the community. The other thing that they tell me about, is that also the demographics with respect to the level of the workforce. They're complaining that the number of a larger portion of the workforce is non-management, and we don't seem to be able to do a good job with bringing in management into our workforce. All levels of management that they identified to me. So I thought that I wanted to bring that message because I think it's important that we understand that despite the fact that we could boast about this, that we are doing better and we are moving the same way with the demographics or the population growth, that we are not doing as good and we need to do a little bit better. So, Mr. Chair, I want to say this and I want to ask our staff that let's be conscious of this. And again, one of the things I talked about is that a few months ago, about 6 or 8 months ago, we talk about being bold, and we talk about taking bold action to increase this proportion. And if we can't increase this proportion, if we can't do better, it's not going to help. It's not going to help our image. Lastly, Mr. Chair, one of the things that was identified to me even before the census came out is that a large proportion of our graduates from visible minority community are leaving this city because they're not getting jobs. They're not being hired. And it pointed out to me that if the City of London cannot hire these folks, then the masses of the organizations and institutions out in our community will not hire them either. Somebody came to my office this morning and spent a whole hour with me and said they just moved here a few weeks ago. This person is a very bright person in a really good job, very well qualified, spent a lot of time in all different parts of the world. And the first thing he said to me when he came here, it was a white community. I didn't know what he meant by that because he didn't say white community at the beginning. He said, but it was all white. And when I dug a little bit more, that's what he said to me. And I explained to him the same proportion that I'm talking about here, same proportion that the census talk about. So, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it at that. I know that many of us are very conscious of this and we want to do better. I know that much of our staff are very conscious of this and they want to do better. I'm suggesting that we find a way and find a bold way to do better so that the next time we do the census, that proportion comes up a little bit more even. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to staff for the information.
Thank you, Councillor. Other speakers on 4? Okay, I'll call the question. We're voting? On 3 and 4, pardon me.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
I'll put item number 14 on the floor. This is a request. We had a delegation from Mr. Sean Lewis about having the council confirm the mayor's declaration and apology to the LGBTQ plus community.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Pardon me. Speakers? Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Salih.
Well, thank you, Your Worship.
Turner.
And Your Worship, I guess the thing, I didn't want to raise certain issues because I would have liked to have just dealt with the apology. I think that it needed to come and this was the time, but unfortunately there's been some issues that have been raised that I think need to be addressed. Your Worship, I was on council back then, believe it or not. And certainly not on council long, just a few months sort of. And suddenly I found myself thrown into what was, as we can see today, a huge issue, very troubling. We had a mayor that made a decision and then was not here to defend that decision and deal with it appropriately. And so council certainly struggled with what to do with the actions of the mayor of the day. And so we did the best we could. Certainly there's the moral side, what was right. But as many of you have learned and will learn more, those who have not been on council long, sometimes there's the moral side of things, and then we have to deal with the legal side of things. Things that we hear and are told in camera, advice that we're given, and we have to deal with that advice and respect that legal advice. So when I first found out about this proposal for an apology was from a reporter who called me up. This was so hot that the reporter said, well, you were on Border Control back then. No, I wasn't on Border Control. The next thing was, well, the apology was going to be the next day, so we wanted to get a quote from you. Well, this is so far back, and I certainly would have liked to have an opportunity, Your Worship, to go through the old reports and refresh my memory. It wasn't a simple issue, it was a complicated issue. So, Your Worship, I've always been supportive of the LGBTQ community, now and all my life. So I'm very concerned, Your Worship, because I've had a report that somebody has labeled that whole council as, I won't even use the word. And that hurts deeply, especially when I have members of that community in my family. So what must they think? And pointing fingers and labeling people, I thought we were trying to get away from that, regardless of the situation. Calling people names, hurtful names, pointing fingers. I thought this opportunity here was a time to heal, to reconcile the past, make things right, historically, especially, and to reach out and make sure everybody in our community, every community that's part of this community, we're all inclusive. So, Your Worship, I brought to your attention my concern, and I will follow up with you on that concern later. It is a serious concern, but I just want to say the members of the council of the day dealt with this issue the best way we could. It was a sad, sad situation. So, Your Worship, thanks again for bringing this, making the apology. I would like to see it come a little different way, but we are here where we are. So let's not go back and rehash. Let's move ahead as a caring community. I think that's what's important on a go-forward basis. So in any event, Your Worship, I did want to ask for, excuse me. I did want to ask for one thing, Your Worship.
Just under 30 seconds left.
I did want to bring a motion, Your Worship. That motion is that there are in-camera confidential reports that were provided to the council at that time. It's a long time ago. I see no reason why, for historical reasons, I think that they should be released so that anyone who wishes to revisit that situation, try to make sense of why the council of the day handled things the way they did. I think the public needs to know. And maybe there'll only be one person who'll read it, or maybe people will take a great interest. But I think, so I'd like to move a motion, Your Worship, if there's a seconder, that all confidential legal reports to do with this issue back then are made available publicly, because I believe they're still protected.
Okay, so just, we'll look for a seconder. I have a seconder in Councillor Salee, and then we'll see where discussion goes from here, and council members may even choose to go into closed session to learn about this. I think there's one person around the horseshoe that has knowledge of it at this time, maybe two. No, one person. Okay, so this is an amendment, Part C. It's been moved and seconded, so let's deal with the amendment.
So sorry, just to clarify, so are we speaking about the legal part?
So the amendment that you seconded was to release all in-camera information from that time.
Gotcha. So I just wanted to speak on the main motion, so I guess I'll wait then?
Sure. Does anyone want to speak on the amendment? Yeah. Councillor Turner, I had you down. On the main motion?
I'll speak to the amendment, then I'll come back to the main motion. I think we should really tread cautiously here, recognizing that that activities that happen in camera at whatever time, the same could be said for the meetings that we hold in camera now, that at some point in a future date decides to be released. I am going to completely support the recommendation that's before us on the main motion. I think it's it probably puts councils now and councils future at some discomfort in their discussions in camera should we go forward with this kind of action at this point. But I'll speak further to the main motion at the appropriate time. So I would urge you to defeat this motion at this time.
Councillor Deputy Mayor Hubert, pardon me.
Well, I'm going to speak only to the, at this point, to the amendment. And I'm going to move that we refer the amendment to a future meeting in camera, because I would like to get legal advice on that amendment at that point. I appreciate where my colleague is going, but as my other colleague says, this is one where I'd like to step a little carefully. Actually, it's ironic that the Congress in the United States is dealing with exactly the same issue, and they're stepping very carefully on that. What's in confidential and how long it stays in confidential session around memos and those sorts of things. So I would like to get legal advice on that and move carefully forward in that respect. It's not an issue of the transparency. That's not my issue. But I do think when we take things in camera where there's privilege attached and we bring it into the public session, I want to know what the legal implications of that, whether it was something that happened a month ago or whether it was something that happened 22 years ago. I think that's the prudent route. And so my motion would be to refer that issue to a future meeting with a report from our city solicitor that would be heard in camera.
I have a seconder for the referral, Councillor Van Holst. Did you want to? You want to support the referral?
Yeah, I don't oppose the referral as long as we have the discussion. There's the opportunity. If it's legally possible, then I think that should happen.
Okay, I'll start the speakers list on the referral then. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to say that I support the referral as well, but I also want to address a comment that Councillor Armstrong made about the whole council of the day being tarred with the same brush back then. Megan Walker was at City Hall, was part of the team at the podium talking about this apology, and I know Megan Walker was a councillor at the time. So I just want, through you, to tell the councillor that I don't believe that anyone thinks that the entire council was of the same mind, and it wasn't necessarily a unanimous vote by any means. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. So the referral has been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Councillor Armstrong has indicated a willingness to second. Councillor, did you want to second this? Councillor Armstrong? Second the referral? Okay. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. I'll call the question unless there are other speakers. Okay, we're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 12-0.
On the main motion, I have Councillor Salee and Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, was there something urgent? Okay, so I was just making sure there wasn't a point of order. Through the chair, I just wanted to say I'm glad this came through committee. I followed the discussion, and I'm thankful to be able to support this. It gives me an opportunity to affirm my support. Had some pleasure in the past of attending the Pride Parade, and along with some of my colleagues around here, so that's always been positive and always great. And I just want to thank Mr. Sean Lewis for bringing this forward as well, and look forward to continuing to build better relations with the LGBTQ plus communities.
Thank you, Councillor Salee. I did miss Councillor Turner. I'll go to Councillor Turner now, and then Morgan, and then Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm very happy to see this come forward, and very happy that we have the opportunity to reaffirm the apology as a council. This was a really impactful moment for me as a Londoner growing up in the city and watching council navigate through this. And it was really challenging. It was challenging to see, and I think Councillor Armstrong's comments are really well considered, that we as a council are seen as a council, as a body, as an entity. The decisions of council, while there might be dissent and split votes, that the activities of the council on the whole are seen as one body, one decision. And so I think it is important because we're here. We do recognize that we are 15 independent voices, and that at the time there were 19 independent voices that didn't have a unanimous decision. That there were a lot of impacts, a lot of thoughts and considerations and points that were considered in that debate. At the end of the day, however, our city chose not to respect a large portion of our community. And the impact on the community was rather significant. As a young Londoner watching that, the impact on me was, I want to know how I fix that. And so years later, I've got that opportunity to at least do something, whatever gesture it is, even if it's minor in nature. I hope that it's seen as in good faith as it's meant, and as significant as it is to me to be able to do so at this point. So I wholeheartedly support the recommendation to reaffirm the apology by the mayor, and that we do so unanimously as a council, and that we do so unanimously as a city together to say that never again will we turn our backs on our community in such a way.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, and I won't repeat too much of what Councillor Turner said because he said it very well. But I'm glad he brought the focus back onto what the intent of both the mayor's apology was, as well as the direction coming out of committee to focus on the community that was wronged, and that it is really about an apology of the government. I felt it was very appropriate for the office of the mayor to do what was done and correct a mistake that office of the mayor did in the past, but equally as meaningful and allows all of the sitting representatives of council to cast their own votes on this, is the position of the government of the day. And this municipal council sitting as this body in this chamber under this format with this mace is the government of the City of London, and this resolution today will be a standing position of that government. And I think that it is important for that position in the past to be corrected. I'm not going to comment on what councils in the past had to face or anything like that. I think, certainly we can look to the future and we can take the actions that we have the opportunity to take now. And I commend Mr. Lewis for bringing this opportunity to committee and allowing this government to debate this and make a decision and right or wrong. And I will wholeheartedly, with my vote, representing the 37,000 people in my ward, cast it in favor of this apology and add my own words of apology to the community who was not treated very well in our past, and And I'm proud, like Councillor Turner, that this opportunity came along while I was a member of council, because I certainly have very close friends in that community who feel very passionately about this. It's not something I can personally reflect on, but I know the impacts and the meaningfulness this has to many members of our community.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Well, thank you, Mayor. I know I've been on council a while, but I wasn't here 22 years ago. In fact, I didn't even live in the city of London 22 years ago. I was living in a very large city in Latin America, Caracas, Venezuela at the time. And so I wasn't a part of that dialogue at all. But what's really apparent to me as I've reviewed the facts of the situation is that the City of London was found to be in violation of the Ontario Rights, Human Rights Commission, and we were found to have acted inappropriately in terms of discrimination against a group of people in our community. Many people have recounted to me some of the things that happened at that time, and I would classify them as the good, bad, and the ugly. But this council also knows that a little while ago we had a tragedy in Miami, and we had a vigil of some 1,000 people, roughly 800 whatever, at the Aeolian. And I had the opportunity to speak to that group on your behalf, on all of our behalf at that day. And so this conversation to me echoes some of the things that I reflected on that night. And we have heard two speeches by our colleagues tonight, Councillor Hopkins, Councillor Cassidy, who have felt, and I think Councillor Salee as well, at various times, not tonight so much, but other times, where they haven't felt welcome in our community. The issue here is how we craft and create a community where there is incredible differences. We like to call them differences. We actually understand them to be diversities. Diversities of faith, diversities of philosophy of life, diversities of approaches in relationship, and yet we come together as a city. A city that becomes a place of caring, a city that comes together as a place of concern, a city where people's strengths are celebrated and their weaknesses are protected. That's the kind of organization I like to be a part of. That's the type of people I want to be around. The essence of that, and I think two of our colleagues have appealed for that, is that we create an environment of grace. I don't have another word in the English language to use for it. But that, in a sense, brings it all together. And so tonight, in our relationships, and many have asked me about various stands I've taken and actions I take, but I have to tell you, one of the things that has been so rich for me in the 18, 19, I've lost track now, 20 years that I've lived in London, my second go-round in London, is the deep relationships that I have developed with people in the community that we're talking about. They're my friends. They're my colleagues. And in fact, I was falsely accused of something in the previous term of council, and it went viral at a community meeting. And you know who stood up for me? Two members who were sitting at the table that actually were colleagues of mine in my day job, but are part of the community that we're talking about, the LGBTQ community. That's the kind of community I have, where people celebrate strengths and protect weaknesses. So absolutely, I will be supporting the apology tonight because it's actually in law, where the Ontario Human Rights Commission said, you as a municipality did something wrong. But also tonight, I appeal for us to continue to create the type of community that we all want to live in and the types of relationships that we all want to enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hubert. Other speakers? Okay, I have no additional speakers. At this time, I'm going to call the question. We're voting. Oh, 1 second, is this? No, the amendment was defeated.
No, it was approved. First one approved, yep.
Oh, right, yeah, thank you. That was on a previous amendment. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
Colleagues, just quickly from the chair, I want to thank you all very much for supporting that motion. I think it makes our message even stronger, and I have great respect for this council every day. I have the greatest respect for this council after that vote. Thank you very much. Councillor Usher, we are now on SPPC. I'm not going to ask you to move the report because I think you may want to speak to a couple of clauses within. Deputy Mayor Hubert, I may ask you if you would please present SPPC.
Backed by popular demand, the second report is Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. I'll put, is there anyone that wants anything particular pulled?
Thank you. I'd take 3 and 4.
I'll put the balance on then, Mayor.
Speakers on the balance. That's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. There are no speakers. I'll call the question. Clause 1, 2, 5 to 11. Voting.
Councillor Usher. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Usher. Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
And Councillor, did you want us to deal with 3 and 4 separately? 3 and 4 separately? Okay, so we'll deal with 3.
Yeah, and Mayor, we did separate this out last night, so A and B we'll call separately and from C, okay? So I'll put 3A and B on.
A and B. So 3A and B, this is clause 3, the accommodation tax. That's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Any discussion on A and B? Okay, I'll call the question. Yeah, go ahead.
I did speak with Mr. Winston today, Mayor, and he wanted to express his gratitude for the discussion last night, and that his team is committed to working with administration to answer some of the questions that were raised. I found that very helpful.
We're voting.
Councillor Turner. Closing the vote and the motion carries 8-4.
3C.
3C, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to vote against 3C. I don't think I need staff to do the work to bring back a report on suggested methods and practices for determining the allocation of these funds. I would actually prefer that they perhaps simply make a change to the reserve fund that was going to be created. So there's going to be a reserve fund for development. They could add or miscellaneous, and then at some future time, council could say they want to do this or that with those funds if we have an idea. I don't think there needs to be a lot of work to figure this out ahead of time. Also, I'm not interested in necessarily in a business case for them for what we're going to do with the funds, because I think the board would deal with a business case for this, and if I can, through you, perhaps through to the deputy mayor. You sit on the board of Tourism London. Councillor Salee does too. Thanks for all the great work, but that do you not deal with the business cases there as a board? Does that need to come back to council, in your opinion?
I think the intent here of council is that because this is a new tax, there's substantial dollars attached to it, that they want some more detail about how that would be spent and some clarity around the mechanisms of that. As council knows, there is a business case that comes forward as part of our multi-year budget from Tourism London. And one of the things that was raised last night is there actually is an agreement between Tourism London and the City of London. Actually, Tourism London employees are seconded. They're actually city employees, many different from, say, LEDC or other boards and commissions. So there are agreements, and I think it would be really prudent for some of that information to come forward in a very organized and structured way. That way, both the hotel industry, the public, and council can be confident that this is going to have the impact that it's desired to have in our community.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I actually appreciate that. That's a very helpful answer.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you may recall from last night, the rationale behind this motion was really to get some clarity, as Councillor Huber had talked about. The other part about this funding, one, I mean, it's if completely allocated to tourism, it becomes a windfall for one specific area of our operations in the municipality, without having put forward any specifics to how that might be expended and used. I think it's really important and prudent for us to have that discussion. The other part about this source of funding is it's variable and potentially hyper-variable, which becomes very difficult to put into core funding for anything. And so I think it's really prudent for us to get some advice on the appropriate manners in which we might manage that funding, whether that be through reserve funds on both sides, both the city's contribution and the Tourism London side, rather than putting it into base funding. Because if let's say there was an economic drop and people stopped staying in hotels for a little while, we'd start to see a dip in that revenue source, or vice versa. Perhaps there was a boom and it's not stable. And I think if you look at any of the sources of funding across the city, we try to do anything we can to smooth out the curves on unpredictable or unstable lines of funding in such a way that we don't find ourselves with a gap that ends up having to be filled by levy. So that's the intent behind this, and I think it's prudent. I hope the rest of council supports it.
Other speakers? Okay, there are no additional speakers. It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. I'm going to call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 12-0.
And clause 4.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. This one says that the following additional policy matters be endorsed. And it goes on to say for review as part of the 2019 Development Charges Background Study. I'd much prefer that this read that the following matters be reviewed as part of that. The word endorsed, I don't know is necessary here. I prefer it not be there because it may it just may give it a wrong impression and be misconstrued. So I would move we made that slight change, and if it's not changed, I'll vote against it. and we'll probably do the same if the same type of wording comes up in the future.
I'd look for a seconder. I would say that the way this is written, it says endorsed for review, and you're asking for review, and I think we're asking for exactly the same thing. So that I would
Yes, absolutely asking for the same thing, except that asking that it be reviewed can't be
I'm not going to get into
misconstrued
a
as
debate
endorsed.
about
Okay.
semantics.
Yeah.
Certainly, Councillor. My interpretation is that each motion would provide us to the exact same end, but I would look for a seconder before we make that change or enter into a debate about that.
That's fine, thank you.
I
And
don't
I'm
see
fine
a
if there's no seconder.
So I think let's proceed unless there are any other speakers. Okay, let's call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11-1.
Okay, let's deal with the third public report of council in closed session. Any volunteers? Want to move it? Thank you, Councillor Asher.
I had no idea what I was getting into when I did this. Okay. Anyway, Mr. Chair, the council met in closed session, and we had several items. I'll repeat them. The first item was property acquisition, W12 landfill buffer site at 5725 White Oaks Road, which, for your information, is in Ward 12, just so that you know. And it is that a procedural matter pursuant to section 2239-6 of the Municipal Act 2001, the following recommendation be forwarded to council in closed session for the purpose of considering whether the recommendation should be forwarded to council for deliberation and a vote in public session. It's a good thing I know how to read. That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, with the concurrence of the Managing Director, Environmental Engineering Services and City Engineer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, the following action be taken with respect to the property at 5725 White Oaks Road. The offer submitted by the estate of James William Johnson to sell to the city the property municipally known as 5725 White Oaks Road, located on the west side of White Oaks Road between Manning Drive and Scotland Drive, further described as Part Lot 21, Concession 6, designated as Part 1, Plan 33R-9546, containing an area of approximately 25.8 acres for the purpose of buffering the city's W12A landfill site, for the sum of $470,000 be accepted, subject to the following condition: the city agreeing to pay the vendors reasonable legal rates, including fees, disbursements, and applicable taxes to complete this transaction, subject to the assessment. B, the financing for this acquisition be prepared to set out in source of financing report, hereto as Appendix A. That's the one. Second item, offer to purchase industrial park lands, 1803299 Ontario Incorporated, Lot 13, Plan 33M-415, River Road Industrial Park. That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, the offer here to Section B, submitted from 1803299 Ontario Incorporated, who is the purchaser, to purchase the city-owned industrial land located on the north side of Scanlon Street in River Road Industrial Park, containing an area of approximately 8.49 acres, being composed of Lot 13, Plan 33M-415 outlined in the sketch hereto as Section A, at a purchase price of $509,400, reflecting a sale price of $60,000 per acre, be accepted, subject to the following conditions: the purchaser adhering to Canadian National Railroad conditions, whereas buildings and structures shall be set back a minimum of 15 meters from the railroad right-of-way, and the submission of a noise and vibration report prepared by a qualified consultant should any building be within 75 meters of the railway right-of-way. And B, purchaser within 60 days from the acceptance of the offer, securing and finalizing at least a lease agreement with the purchaser's tenant satisfactory to the purchasers in his sole discretion. Item number 3, property disposition, former Sherwood Forest Public School located at 7 Annandale Drive. That on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, with the concurrence of the Managing Director, Planning and City Planner, and on the advice of the Manager, Realty Services, the following action be taken with respect to the subject property located at 7 Annandale Drive, being approximately 3.825 acres, and further described as Lot 246 to 255, both inclusive, Lots 267 to 270, both inclusive, and part of Lots 244, 245, and 271, and part of Block 1 and part of Block K on Registered Plan 891 in the former Township of Westminster, now in the City of London, County of Middlesex, being part of parcel PIN numbers 080700262 LT. A, the offer submitted by Forest Park Homes Hampton Group under the corporate name Forest Park Hazelden Incorporated to purchase the subject property from the city for the sum of $2,512,000 be accepted subject to the following conditions. 1, the purchaser acknowledging that the property is being purchased on an as-is basis. 2, the purchaser being allowed until 4:30 p.m. on March 30th, 2008 to examine the title to the property. 3, the purchaser having a period of 60 days from the date of acceptance of this agreement to satisfy itself in its absolute discretion as to the technical soil and environmental conditions of the property. 4, the vendor agreeing at the vendor's expense to remove the archaeological holding provision and the property on or before the closing date. 5, if required, the vendor agreeing to grant the purchaser an easement for the service connection, the service easement, as a nominal consideration from Finsbury Crescent over part of the parklands which location shall be mutually agreed upon between the purchaser and vendor. 6, the completion of this agreement being conditional until June 15, 2018, upon the purchaser satisfying itself that it will be able to obtain on terms satisfactory to the purchaser site plan approval necessary or desirable in connection with the purchaser's intended development and use of the property consistent with the purchaser's submission in response to RFQUAL 17-11 issued by the vendor. 7, the vendor agreeing to prepare and deposit on the title on or before closing and at his expense a reference plan describing the property. B, proceeds from this sale in the amount of $2,262,000 be allocated to replenish the land acquisition reserve fund. And C, proceeds from this sale in the amount of $250,000 be allocated to the budget for the Sherwood Forest Future Urban Park adjacent to this infill demonstration site. Do I have to read the rest? After presentation of the project report, the council in closed session? No, okay. So, that's it. Done.
Thank you, Councillor Rusher. We're going to go to you every time. That's been moved by Councillor Rusher. And it's been seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any discussion? I'll call the question.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11-0.
Deferred matters, colleagues. Inquiries. Councillor Van Holst.
Yes, Your Worship. So I had an inquiry. Of course, with the Junos, we're going to have a lot of people visiting us. They're going to be traveling from the east down Hamilton Road, which is one of our gateways. I'm, of course, concerned of beautifying that. We have beautified gateways before, and I wanted to inquire about the expenses we incurred for that. So Wellington, from the river to the tracks, I wanted to find out from staff how much we spent on that to, for instance, put the utilities underground and the other expenses. I did inform staff that I was going to be making this inquiry. I'm wondering if there's anybody here to respond to it.
Previous treasurer is talking to current treasurer. Current treasurer is looking at planner.
Okay, I'm sorry, I did inform some of the engineering staff, and they said thanks for the heads up, but maybe they're not here to answer it.
I see no one.
Mr. Chair, we don't have the information, obviously, so we'll report back.
Well, thank you very much. If you get that information to the councillor, that would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other inquiries? Councillor Armstrong.
Brought this up before. I wanted to follow up on it, Your Worship, to do with the ranked ballots and the cost of the ranked ballots. We're supposed to be getting a report back in a little while and so on. I know, I hear that, but I just want to understand, do we have a contract with somebody in place right now? And if there is a contract, I'm assuming the cost of that contract, unless it's under a certain amount of money, does that not have to, especially if it's new money, do we not have to approve of that? Or like, how is that all working? Can I get a minute or less sort of understanding on how that's working?
I'm afraid, councillor, you'll get the same answer that you got last time you made the inquiry. There's a report coming forward in February. It's on time, and that information will be provided to you in February. There is a contract, and that information will become available when the report is made public.
Okay, so help me understand.
Do you have
If
another
there's a contract and regardless of the amount, it's been executed. So it's a document. It's been executed, I assume. People are doing work, you must be paying them, I'm assuming. Why is that available? Why is that not available to the public? Why is
Councillor
that?
Thank you. As the chair of the Corporate Services Committee that deals with municipal elections matters, I would invite the councillor to come to committee when we talk about the issue. What are we talking about? It's not really an inquiry. It's been asked. It's coming to committee.
Yeah, okay. I think, Councillor Armstrong, that you've asked the question a couple of times. You've received the same answer. The information will be available for you in February. Other inquiries? Councillor Sully.
I just have a brief inquiry, and I think no one from council will be upset about this. I know in the past I've had questions and had a conversation with Mr. John Winston. He's a great wealth of knowledge, and I think through our discovery we found out that there was $100,000 that was donated to the City of London to do some upgrades for the Welcome to London entryway. And I just sparked my memory yesterday with the conversations. I know I had conversations with Mr. Fleming. I don't know if his memory is better than mine's right now, or if he can come back with an update on that. But just because I wanted us to not miss that $100,000.
Yeah, we'll report back on that. Yeah. Okay, other inquiries? Okay, emergent motions. Bylaws. We're going to break the bylaws into three. A reminder that Bill 78 was referred back, so you won't see that. Let's deal with Bills 55 to 77 and added 79 to 81, excluding 59, 61, 63, and 64. First reading, moved by Councillor Turner, second by Councillor Usher. Call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11-0.
Okay, second reading. Moved by Councillor Turner, second by Councillor Hopkins. Any speakers? Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11-0.
Third reading. Moved by Councillor Turner, second by Councillor Salih. Call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 11-0.
Okay, colleagues, let's deal with Bill 59. There was a conflict declared on 59. We're voting on first reading. Moved by Councillor Turner, second by Councillor Hopkins.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 10 with 1 recused.
Second reading. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Morgan. Any speakers? Call the question. Want to speak? When people put their hand up here, it means they want to speak. Okay. Call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 10 with 1 recused.
Third reading. Bill 59. Councillor Turner is the owner of Lot 61. Moved by Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Councillor Morgan. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 10 with 1 recused.
Okay, let's deal with the third batch of bylaws. This is 61, 63, 64. There was a conflict declared on each of these. First reading, moved by Councillor Escher, second by Councillor Morgan. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 10 with 1 recused.
Second reading. Moved by Councillor Van Hol, seconded by Councillor Morgan. Any speakers? Councillor Turner? We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 10 with 1 recused.
Third reading, colleagues. Last batch of bylaws. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Morgan. Call the question. And we're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 10 with 1 recused.
Colleagues, that brings us to the close of the meeting. I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Squire.
Yes, sir.
And seconded by Councillor Morgan. All those in favor? Any opposed? Call the question. Thank you. Motion carries.